Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Reclamation Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Brad Kafer. Michael's traveling on vacation this week as we record, but we've got Bradley Gray, pastor of Stonington Baptist Church in Pennsylvania, and one of our Reclamation guys. He's been on the podcast before. He's going to be co-hosting with me today. So welcome, Bradley.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Brad. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, definitely, man. And thank you for this amazing connection because we were able to get author and teacher Dave Zahl on. He's the founder and director of Mockingbird Ministries, does a lot of different things, Mockingbird blog, the Mockingcast, Brother Zahl podcast, authored some really popular books. Many of our listeners have probably already heard and or read, like Seculosity and Low Anthropology. And today we're going to be talking some about his newest book, The Big Relief, The Urgency of Grace for a Worn Out World. But Dave's been promoting the clarity of the gospel all over the internet for 20 years now. And we're just happy to have you on. So thanks for being here, Dave.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Brad and Bradley. I like to. It's nice to have two Brads. I've never. One is never enough. So.
Oh man.
Yeah, that happens a lot. One of my best friends in real life is named Brad, and we go to church together, and sometimes we'll just be like the Brads. So it can get confusing,
nice,
but you just got to clarify who you're talking about. But yeah, today we'll be we'll probably start off with The Big Relief, just kind of talking about the impetus for that book, and we'll just kind of let it be conversational. And I know you and Bradley Gray have worked together before recording stuff, and we'll just kind of let the grace of God flow, and our listeners can benefit from that. So yeah, just to start off, tell us about your latest book, kind of how that came to be.
Sure. Well, it's called The Big Relief, The Urgency of Grace for a Worn Out World, as you just told listeners. And I see it kind of as a third book in this trilogy I've been writing. The Seculosity was an attempt to translate the doctrine of justification by faith, justification by grace through faith, into contemporary language, using the kind of a conceit of replacement religion, and looking at all the different ways it's sort of a idol smashing book, but it's slightly adjacent to that, because I see it more as like a justification thing rather than a worship thing. And then Low Anthropology was an attempt to translate the understanding of the bondage of the will and the sort of original sin and creatureliness limitation into a sort of a biblical anthropology into contemporary language as well. And that was a really gratifying project. But by the end of it, I was a little weary of talking about, slightly dark things. If you get too deep into human anthropology, yes, there's a lot good, but there's the dark side of human nature is substantial. And to talk about sin, to talk about limitation, to talk about lack of agency and addiction and compulsion for 2 years, this was conceived already. Like, I wanted to write a book that really highlighted the good news. If Low Anthropology kind of tells the truth about ourselves, and it does point to the gospel in many different ways, and Low Anthropology and Seculosity tells the truth sort of about culture, while also mining our own, psychologies and spiritual practices to get there. This one, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit more clearly and upfront about God and the grace of God, and specifically this central doctrine that we sometimes take for granted, yet something that Mockingbird's been known for, something that certainly characterized my ministry, even when from people who flock to Mockingbird because they are writing, my father's writing or my brother's writing, because we talk so often and boldly about grace, to people who label us grace Nazis, or that like ultra grace or something like that. There's pejoratives that people think it's too far. So I wanted to say, like, well, what do we mean when we talk about the grace of God, and how does that translate into contemporary language and reference points and to people living today? all these books are although they're, I think that I'm a Christian, so I think that they're written from that point of view, and hopefully that confessing Christians will find something there, some as we all Christians need the gospel just as much as anyone. But I'm also writing with the sort of the rest of the world in view, trying to bring a kind of a so what approach to Christian proclamation, for people who don't care about the Bible, for people who don't maybe even believe in God, or very very ambivalent about the entire organized religion project. Like what is exciting, or why would a person be so energized and focused on the grace of God, or simply grace, period. So that was the undertaking of this book. And so to do it, I broke grace down, though it can't really be broken down, but I tried to look at it from different angles. And the controlling, or the overarching conceit this time was relief, the affective, the emotional experience of relief that I find very, very closely associated with the grace of God. And that could be relief from condemnation, that can be relief from guilt, that could be relief from keeping up, that could be relief from death, that can be relief from deserving. There's all sorts of ways to think about it. Anxiety, but the book tries to look at grace from different angles, with a view towards building a visceral, robust, intellectually engaging, but culturally fluent understanding.
Yeah, well said. It's very beautiful. And I know just reading it for myself, there were many times when I experienced the big relief just from reading the stories. I found myself constantly smiling. This is such good news. And I was also really helpful in talking to my kids. We were on a trip recently, and they just kept fighting, and there was just a lot of strife and quarreling, and it's always like that deserving piece, and well, she did this but he said that, and so we had this kind of family powwow where I was like, listen, and we talked about the incongruity of grace, and I shared that story of the guy showed up with a gun and then was offered wine, and he's broke down and just needed a hug, and it went from a robbery to therapy. And so I just was pointing them towards that grace, and look, the only way we're going to break this cycle of escalating strife is if we begin to take ownership for our actions and show each other grace. I have to show up to you in ways that reflect what you don't deserve, and you have to show up for each other in ways you don't deserve. And of course, you can't do that on your own. You need Jesus, and he's the ultimate example of that. He's the one who did it for us, and it's the overflow of his abounding grace that begins to change us as we realize the incongruity of God's gift to us. We begin in small ways to show that same incongruity to each other. So I don't know how well it took root, but thank you for giving me a parenting
Maybe they'll remember
tool.
it one day. That's when they get to a geometry class. Congruity. I remember that word for some reason.
Yeah. So, but it was just super helpful to be look, this is what grace looks like in action. Jesus said, love the way you want to be loved, not just love the way you've been loved. So that idea of mirroring each other's behavior and then breaking that and trying to start a new trajectory that reflects grace and peace. So that was just an incredible narrative to really help. And of course, you included that story about the Ugandan, the forgiveness that led at, post genocide, and the killer became the family member of the victim. And you can't make that stuff up, and it's our sensibilities are constantly being offended by grace. But when we find ourselves being the ones who need forgiveness, it quickly becomes the sweetest thing imaginable. It's only those who don't see their need for forgiveness who are offended by it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, grace is the big resentment when it comes to other people. When it comes to the grace that's extended to other people, especially those who've hurt us or those we don't like. You're like, well, why do they get to be treated like that, and I didn't get that treatment? And I think that it's the big relief when it comes to you, and so that's why any kind of stories about the grace of God. And I tried to, I tell a lot of. There's a lot of illustrations in this book. I also try to do a little bit more biblical exposition than I tend to gravitate towards, but I think that the reason the stories are there is to ground things in the here and now, and in the emotional experience we have of grace, which again, it comes as an affront when it targets those that have hurt us, or those our enemies, or our frenemies, or simply our colleague who seems to be quite lazy, but when our life is on the line and when we are in need, it is the only thing that'll do. So there's an urgency to grace that I think there's a gravity to it. I mean, I do tell stories about forgiveness after genocide, and I do talk about people pointing guns at one another. But there's also, the little things. It's relationships. I quoted a therapist in there who said that the difference between healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships are healthy relationships are ones where people have figured how to let go of the past. In other words, you're not constantly keeping score or keeping a grudge against the person that you love. You're not holding something above their head. You're not holding their past against them. And a friend sent me a meme the other day. It's like, this is what it's like when I argue with my wife, and it's like you see like a video of like the earth being made. It's like, let's go back 50 million years, It's like but husbands are like that too. We can recount the past injustices all the time. And so if there's some element of grace, and it might not be something you can effort into existence, it might be something that you go to God, that only God really gifts you, and sometimes we forgive other people, and it's usually a miracle when it happens. But to remember that we are forgiven by God, or that God has treated us graciously, I think is the wellspring of relief that Christians are tied into, I would hope. So yeah, I want to spell out what it looks like in the dramatic instances, but I also want to talk about what it looks like in the mundane, because I think grace is something I don't just need when I've yelled and screamed at my kids. I also need grace in traffic, and if the staff meetings at my office job, which can be interminable and full of hidden unspoken messages, and where does grace play in those places, and is there any relief? These are the questions I'm trying to at least bring up.
I'm still so struck by that idea of grace as relief, just because of the images that it conveys, especially from the standpoint of like, if you're receiving relief, that automatically implies pressure or tension or some sort of burden. And not to just set you up too much, Dave, but I know that you've done a lot of writing in Mockingbird, as well as just the pressures that are either explicit or implicit upon us. Can you just kind of unpack that, especially in terms of like either pressures we put on ourselves or maybe pressures we feel, and how poignant it is that grace comes as this word of relief precisely in ways that we don't expect or anticipate?
Sure. Thanks, Bradley. The pressure is kind of the air we breathe. I think it's the water we swim in our. I think it's just a human thing, but it's certainly a contemporary thing. And what I mean by pressure is the pressure to keep growing, to keep improving in your life. This year's got to be better than the last. I've got to make more money this year than I did that last year, or I've got to be able to run a little faster this year. Like, this marathon's got to have a personal best. All of this treadmill that we're on. And then once you're raising children, it becomes even, it's like you've got more things that you're trying to, the pressure is on to raise these children well, but for them to excel and them to not fall behind their peers and to feel like you're setting them up for future success or security at least. There's a whole lot of pressure. There's the guilt exerts a certain amount of pressure on a person. I think which means the past exerts a certain amount of pressure that can look like debt for some of us. I talk about it in terms of debt. Like debt, people feel like I'm living under this heavy burden of debt. Like that is an actual pressure people feel. But the pressure to produce and perform, these are very contemporary pressures that I think are a little bit more acute than they used to be. They've always been there, but someone just forwarded me a article from The Guardian about what is it guilty of reading Infinite Jest in public. What is it that we hate about what is considered performative public reading? So if you see the guy on the subway train or on the bus, and he's got a huge book cracked open. I'm in the middle of reading Middlemarch, by George Eliot, this English epic that is so beloved, and I'm afraid to read it in public because I don't want to look pretentious. What is that? What weird pressure is that? So, but like there are also certain places where, frankly, I want to be seen reading Middlemarch because I think it'll win me friends, or he reads real literature and not just short things. And there's so much pressure. And then of course there's the pressure to save yourself, the pressure to live forever that we're seeing spelled out, and like just Silicon Valley just spells it out, slow aging, like the kind of living longer and longer and longer, these vitamins and not those, and this amount of sleep and not that. There's so much pressure out there. And I've said all that without even mentioning like the fact that that a mortgage costs an insane amount compared to what it used to, or a new car. Like the financial pressure is mounting. So my sense of like, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Pilgrim's Progress, John Bunyan's. You talk about a book that was inspired by the Reformation, but the English, epic bestseller from the 17th century, I believe. There's a children's version of it called Dangerous Journey. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. It's like got these pictures and really vivid illustrations. And Christian is the main character, and he sort of leaves his family at the beginning to go on a journey to the celestial city, to heaven. It's about his sort of life as a pilgrimage. But the whole time he's carrying this enormous burden. He's got this, and it's like this misshapen big rock thing on his back that he's bowed over. And it's Bunyan's way of talking about the burden of sin, the burden of death, the flesh, the devil. But at the very end of the book, you see in the pictures the ropes snap, and the huge burden he's been carrying through all of the slough of despair, and through all of these crazy cities, it comes off him. And as a kid, I remember that scene being really, really, it's the apex of the saving moment, the salvation moment. It's not like a narrative thing. It's like you will come to heaven and come to the celestial city, and it's just that's what I connote with salvation, and salvation is by grace. So I think that the contemporary pressures, they look a little different than they used to, but they amount to still a huge burden that you're carrying. And women are carrying this burden, and men are carrying this burden, and teenagers are carrying this burden, and retirees are carrying this burden, and clergy are certainly carrying this burden like never before. But so are teachers, and so are, college students. It just feels like it gets larger and larger and larger. And so if you're a Christian, you're like, well, we've got this, the word of God's grace is a word of like, lay your burdens down. It is truly like, come unto me, all ye who are weary and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Like that is the invitation. So why are we leading with all this other stuff? Like if people are truly bowed under this amount of pressure, let's foreground that. And I wanted to try to foreground it in my peculiar way. knowing that lots of great books have been written about grace, but I thought maybe there's some fresh images that could reach a person the way that Dangerous Journey book reached me when I was 9 years old.
Yeah, that's really spectacular. And, that affective relief was at the heart of the Protestant Reformation. Like, that's one of the things we've been trying to really highlight across various episodes of the Reclamation, is that when the Reformers discovered justification by grace through faith, it brought them tremendous affective relief. Whether it's the Lutheran Confession saying that this doctrine needed to be recovered, so for the consolation of consciences, it's Article 20 of the Augsburg Confession, or whether it's William Tyndale introducing the New Testament, talking about the gospel being this delightful word of good news that makes men merry and dance and sing for joy, or Thomas Bilney at the White Horse Inn saying that he was, my weary bones leaped for joy at the sound of the good news. And so, that's like the bullseye of what we're reclaiming. Like, what do we mean by gospel clarity? It's the facts of what God has done in history and the personal work of Christ to save sinners, of whom we're the foremost, and that God saves us all by himself. And that when we hear this joyful announcement, it releases us from burden. And so that big relief that was so visceral for those early Protestants, and they were willing to kind of break with Rome, endure hardship, possibly have martyrdom call their name, because they experienced this is the thing that set me free. And you can get into all kinds of nuances in theology and become kind of nerdy about different things, but like at the end of the day, it's like, is Jesus enough for me? And the Reformation says yes.
And it's a happy announcement. And I think that sometimes in really confessional circles, we get very anxious about emotions and over-promising, especially. We don't want people feel like, well, there's a difference between happiness and faith. And yes, there's a huge difference between happiness and faith. And that's not necessarily, but you can get to the point in kind of, more academic or historically Protestant circles now, where we're so far away from those early moments where people were sort of, as Capon talks about, just drunk on the grace of God and the justification and sort of staggering around blind. So excited about this. You get to the point where it's become so safe, and you want to say, well, if it's bringing you no relief, well, then maybe we've gone wrong somewhere. Like, it doesn't need to be nothing. There is an objective reality that is distinct from the subjective effect that it has. But I've felt that maybe, at least in some church circles that I've been familiar with, we go too far in that direction. We get afraid of, you want to say, well, there's, if it's of no immediate relief to you, are you sure we're talking about the same thing? Because like, it's I don't know how it could not be, unless you were freighting the gospel with all sorts of buts and ands and fine print. So this book is an attempt to sort of get back to it, not to overpromise, and to say that there is, I think I put it, I was happy with a line in this introduction, like, there is more to the Christian faith than mere consolation, but there's never less than that. So if you've somehow received a Christianity or a theology or an operating theology that does not have consolation in it, that does not have relief in it, well, then you might be talking about a different gospel. So. And I think Melanchthon is another one of the people, you didn't quote him, but Melanchthon is another one of these guys who was very interested in the heart dimension of it's not a head trip there, and he was always in favor of illustration and telling stories and stuff like that. So I had a couple of Reformation scholars read through this book pretty carefully to make sure I wasn't putting my foot in my mouth, and they're smarter than I am, so I think they say I did okay.
I think it's interesting that as the more you read about the Protestant Reformation proper, really, despite all of the other solas or whatever that come out of it, what you find, at least in my impression of it, is that it's a recovery of assurance, which is what relief basically is. It's the assurance of your enoughness that isn't based upon any intrinsic quality in you. And I think that that is, if we want to put it in maybe modern parlance, that's how I would term it. Like, this movement was a recovery of this assurance that comes outside of us, which, is there any other relief other than that? And I would say obviously no, as we've affirmed. And I think that what a great message for the church to be known for, which again, it kind of speaks to what Brad was saying earlier, which is when we're reading the gospel or where we're hearing the gospel, we should smile. And as you said, Dave, if we're not, maybe we're not hearing it or receiving it properly. Something's off somewhere.
Yeah, I'm going wrong in some respect. Like, I don't think there's anything controversial about this book. I think it's an attempt to restate what I always have thought it would be the heart of the good news. And it's not a comprehensive, systematic theology. That's not my gifting. I'm really trying to more do a combination of persuasion and preaching with a little bit of humor and kind of connection that maybe sheds some fresh light, and it's sort of almost like pre-evangelistic work, though this is a little bit more boldly, Jesus Christ died for you to save you from sin and death, and not by your own merits, but by sort of solely by his initiative and his shed blood on your behalf. Like, I think I've been other books of mine have been maybe a little bit more retreating about that, but you can't talk about grace without talking about the central announcement of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But I also want to earn it. I want to get there. I want to make sure people understand what's at stake. I want to ground. I want to sort of mine the territory, so that folks we're not just living in the first century, that it's actually has to do with your life today and the pressures that you're under, and it's not divorced. It's not some kind of historical bubble.
Yeah, well said. And I think, highlighting the ways that we all tend to feel that pressure. We didn't say it explicitly this way, but that sort of the freedom to justify yourself on your own terms has never been greater. And yet that pressure is unbearable. And so so there's so much push for, like, you're the author of your own story, and you command your destiny in a way that's hard for other time periods to wrap their heads around. And yet that pressure to self-justify and to have that much creative freedom with our own identities crushes us in a way that is hard to articulate sometimes. And being able to receive identity as a gift is amazing. Like, to just step away from those performative identities and be like, no, I am who I am because of the Creator who made me in his image, called me very good, and when stained by sin, sent his Son to take on the flesh where the corruption was and live the life I should have lived, to die for me and restore me to the Father, that I could have the dignity and the honor and the glory of God restored to me, not because of what I've done, but because of what he's done and because of who he is for me. And then to be baptized into that story and receive all of that as a gift, like, that's such a profound shift. And I think a lot of the contemporary evangelical kind of what we call pietism, where you see so much performative identity in the modern church, where they've sort of taken on the cultural norms in so many ways. It's its own kind of bondage, where you're trying to manufacture the Christian life in a similar way that other people are trying to manufacture their basketball identity or their career identity. And it's like, no, the church is different, guys. The church is where you go and you just sit down in the pew and go, oh, and then have Christmas morning, because Jesus is there, is the best gift you could ever have. And he's there for you. And so I love how the Big Relief just captures that, like, historic Protestantism is about coming to receive Jesus and his benefits, have Christmas again, if you will. Philip Carey said that on one of our episodes. I thought it was just brilliant. He's like, you can have Christmas every day.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love Philip Carey. That yeah, and people who know about the Reformation and care about these things will, if they read The Big Relief, they will see me using a lot of the tools. Like I have a whole chapter on imputation, which I don't think, there's been a book about grace that sort of centers imputation in a kind of a popular way for a long time. It's considered to be somewhat controversial, even in Protestant circles. And I think that imputation is enormous relief for people who are chasing their own identity. And so much of our life today and our discourse is surrounding the kind of establishment of identity and the maintenance of identity. And it's all kind of a life is seen as this finding yourself, knowing yourself, and then asserting yourself. And what happens if you get it wrong? These are very anxious questions, and the doctrine of imputation says that God has given you, again, by sheer grace, he has bestowed upon you his righteousness, which is to say, your identity is not really a matter ultimately of what you do or don't do or are capable of, or even the gifts you've been given. Certainly not of the blind spots you have, but it's a gift. That's Christmas. I mean, that's Christmas for real people. It's Christmas for me, and I need to hear it proclaimed. Like as I said earlier, just because I'm a Christian doesn't mean I don't need to hear. I'm not right. I wrote this book to myself as much as I wrote it to the wider world. Merry Christmas, you guys. Christmas in July. Today's
Christmas
July.
in July.
Yes.
Dave, you mentioned just a moment ago that you were maybe more explicit with your both biblical exposition, but also interaction with the words of Christ. And maybe to our readers or listeners, they might know that, or they might realize, or maybe a small detail they haven't realized yet, is that if they read The Big Relief, the longest chapter is your chapter on the atonement. Was that intentional, or is that an inevitable outcome based upon what you were hoping to convey?
Huh. I didn't realize it was the longest chapter, Bradley. I mean, I'm glad it is. I think it's central. I think that the atonement has become a very shaky ground for a lot of Christian discourse. And I'm in a mainline denomination that really is nervous about atonement. Anytime you talk about substitution, anytime you talk about in sort of legal frameworks about what's going on. And I felt that I couldn't write this book and dodge the atonement. But not only that, was like I love the atonement. Like it's not.
Yes.
I get that people have been brought up in situations where penal substitutionary atonement has been used as a cudgel, and it has really been sort of almost conveyed as its opposite to folks. Like, look at little Timmy. You did that bad thing again. Now Jesus is going to pay. Like that kind of thing. But I try to in that chapter I talk about a guy, Richard Beck, who's got a ministry to men in a maximum security prison, and he was coming from a more progressive theological bent, and he was sort of skirts around the atonement in his Bible studies, and then he realized all the guys wanted to talk about was guilt and expiation, and like their ears perked up at that. Pastorally, to not talk about it would be to deny them what the avenue, the most immediate proclamation of mode of grace he could imagine. So I think, I think that it's I knew that it was going to be. My readership, at least as I conceive of it, is fairly broad in terms of mainliners and evangelicals and kind of non-Christians, and I knew that I would need to be very careful in that chapter to spell things out in a way that I have understood what the atonement is, what the cross sort of quote unquote accomplishes, and what the courtroom, the accusation and the justification But so I wonder, I was worried that I was too conciliatory in that chapter, but I worked on it a lot to make sure that it was clear without being callous, and also realized that if you're not in prison, that there might be other aspects of the grace of God that are going to, if you're dying, for example, if your body is falling apart, the fact that God offers rescue and eternal life is going to be of more perhaps emotional immediacy to you than the courtroom. Or if you're very, very concerned about your identity and you're a teenager and you've never really done anything that terrible, but you just don't know who you are and don't like yourself very much, well, imputation might be something that's very exciting to you. So yeah, but for those who I've been very, one of the very gratifying responses to the big relief has been a few much more kind of I guess, liberal, progressive leaning Christians who said he the way he talks about atonement makes me want to reconsider my reservations about it. And I hope that does that, because I've taken my cue a little bit from Fleming Rutledge in her book on the crucifixion, who weighed in by saying there is a substitutionary aspect here. It's not the only aspect, but it is a major aspect. And if you take it away, you really take away a huge pillar that this entire faith is sitting upon. So it's in there. It's not the first thing, because I wanted to build up to it a little bit. And the pithier chapters are after that. But I'm glad that you noticed that there's some extra energy and sensitivity around it. And it's just one of these, I sometimes think people's aversion to what's called today atonement theology, which is ridiculous, because I think of people have different views of the atonement, but to have any understanding of the atonement is called quote unquote atonement theology in kind of mainline circles. And I just I wanted to rehabilitate that a little bit in a way that shows that people, that sometimes our aversion can be a function of actual privilege, which is not something anyone wants to hear. But if you've never done anything wrong, if you've never actually been in jail, if you've never actually had to be in a court where someone's pointing a finger at you, it's a lot easier to wave it away. If you can not see yourself as an actual transgressor. So anyway, I hope that chapter did something there. And I heard from one of my endorsers, who's a non-Christian cultural critic in Canada. She told me, she's like, I finally understood what Christians talk about for atonement. She said, it's forgiveness for people who have no other entree into forgiveness.
Wow.
As someone who grew up being, either told explicitly or implicitly that it was penal substitutionary atonement or nothing, I found it very relieving, just because as I've grown in my own theological proclivities, seeing it's not one or the other. It's kind of a kaleidoscope of things that are happening there, and it was relieving for me not to be too on the nose, just to hear the fact that we can affirm that there's a lot of different things happening at the same time on the cross, and we don't have to be confining in terms of what we are seeing happening there. And so from that sense, yeah, definitely 2 thumbs up from this guy if you needed that.
Love it. No, I'm always interested in your regard, Bradley. Kaleidoscope's a good word here. We get into, Christians especially, but we get into a very dodgy situation when everything is zero sum. It's either this or that. And when it comes to the cross of Christ, and the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, it can support, it's a very, as my little brother says, it's thick. It is thick. People for thousands of years now have come to it from different points in their lives and from different vantage points, and found sustenance and found grace in a variety of different expressions. But it doesn't mean that it's just one and not the other. Why we ever got to that point, if it's not biblically supported, perhaps you can rule some things out. But if it's there, and the substitutionary language is there, but so is Christus Victor, so is exemplar, even like it's all there. It's like you can
Yes.
you can find some strand to you, and doesn't that make it more compelling rather than less? To me it does.
Definitely.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, we had Carl Moser on recently to talk about the atonement and Christ's satisfaction. And he really pushed back against that kind of modern idea of like different atonement theories. They're all in competition and only one is correct. It's like, no, there's like the kaleidoscope is a good word. There's a lot of ways to look at this. And then we also pushed back against kind of the modern bastardization of PSA, that the way it's been articulated and kind of popular evangelicalism often kind of skews away from the historic language of the church, both before the Reformation and in the Reformation. And so just being able to talk through that, what do we mean, and have a much richer, it's a much richer thing when you understand like God took on flesh for us and for our salvation, so that, as Athanasius says, he could be one of us, but he talks about the incarnation, the culmination of which is the death. And, so Paul's gospel centers on death, burial, and resurrection, but the whole package is good news. We just had Justin Holcomb on, and we talked about different facets of the gospel connecting to different symptoms, particularly in the cases of abuse, that it's not just the forgiveness piece. There's Jesus experienced our shame, or, he knows what it's like to suffer. He endured this and that. And so we have that faithful high priest who is without sin, but also knows our frame and is sweated and bled with us. And so just being able to kind of see, Calvin says he began redemption at the incarnation. It's not just the death on the cross. There's this holistic emphasis, and Jesus willingly shouldered our curse. The Heidelberg Catechism says he suffered his whole life under the wrath of God, most significantly at the cross. And so you begin to realize, like, this isn't cosmic child abuse. This is a triune God planning to rescue sinners at great cost to himself, and seeking to save the lost. And so, yeah, I'm really grateful. It's what an amazing testimony you have of that woman in Canada saying, I get it now. I understand. This is like access for people with no access. It's like, yes, that's it. He made peace by the blood of his cross.
And you just said shouldered the curse. I mean, what do we shoulder except for a burden, a curse? Like it's there's relief of this being removed from you and I. And the only thing I'd say about the atonement chapter is I'm speaking a little bit to some internal Christian debates in there that I feel like I had to cover some bases in a way that the book is not really pitched at that. But I felt like it was necessary for a couple pages to basically say, I know what you're thinking, kind of, and I'm not saying this, I'm not saying that, but I am saying this. It's like that was the one place where I think I almost got into inside baseball, which the book is really trying not to play inside baseball. But if you're going to, you want a hearing from people. Unfortunately, when it comes to atonement, you have to do a little bit of positioning in a way that I think is ultimately in service of the greater, kaleidoscope, as we talked about.
Yeah, and you've been so good at like communicating the big ideas of Christianity to like the everyday person on the street, in my opinion. Like, I've been so blessed by that. Some of your other family members perhaps have done more of the speaking to Christians, or, I like theology. I've listened to Simeon speak on YouTube and stuff like that, but I've really appreciated your gift of, I know, communicate. Yeah, I've really appreciated you, like your gift of communicating the grace of God, really making it accessible and ordinary, weaving it into the warp and woof of people's everyday lives. And you did it again in big relief of just connecting stories, and you show like it doesn't matter if like the more dramatic examples or the more mundane examples, like they're all burdensome, and we all need relief. It doesn't matter if we're white collar or blue collar, if we've been in jail or we haven't been in jail. Like, we all share in this like universal burden of being in Adam, of being fallen creatures. We feel all these pressures, and you're recovering what I think is the central claim of the gospel in some sense, which is Matthew 11, 28 following, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest." And you've made that rest look really appealing to our neighbors who otherwise aren't interested in the Bible. And I really like that.
Brad. That's the whole, there are plenty of other worthy tasks to do, but that's the one I feel like I get the most satisfaction out of attempting to do. Partly because I work, it helps that I work in a church and I deal with people who are there almost by accident and need some help into the lingo or the tradition and some hand holding, and that's what I'm most interested in, and that's what the Big Relief is trying to do. And you sacrifice what you end up sacrificing a little bit is kind of some of the timeliness. I think the Big Relief is probably a pretty evergreen book. I mean, I'm hoping that it's not going to go out of date very quickly. Some of the stories might, but it in the publishing industry, you need to have like a sexy hook that like is like this is right now. And this book, Seculosity, had a little more of that. It's almost become a little cliched since I put it out, but like this was an attempt to write something that was going to last a little longer. And so I get a little insecure, I guess, that I'm not talking about the issue of the day, but I think this is the ultimate issue of every day. So
Yes.
What you sacrifice in some controversial glamour, you gain, I think, in some lasting I guess applicability or just relevance.
You got anything, Bradley Gray? Didn't want to hog the microphone.
No, you're good, Brad. I was just going to say that I think what Dave hints at here is, yeah, indeed, there is no other evergreen message other than this idea of grace. And those who seek to switch to something else are probably switching to some other answer where they're finding relief anyways. And I think that that's what makes this, not only just this book, but when you go into the scriptures and realizing that all of it from Genesis to Revelation is this beautiful tapestry in which God is weaving the story of grace. One of my favorite Scottish theologians from the 1800s, his name was Horatius Bonner. He wrote this beautiful book called The Story of Grace, which I've often said is my favorite book treatment of that topic, which now I have to say is rivaled by Dave's. But regardless, he talks about the idea that that grace isn't just something that happened by surprise or after the fact. This is something that comes out of the heart of God, and how this is woven from creation to fall to redemption. It's always been this beautiful indeed tapestry, or this way in which we can see grace at work in all these wonderful little ways, which indeed that's the most evergreen message we could ever be a part of, which makes it all the more uncanny that God would use voices such as us to do that. But praise God that he does.
Well, thank you. I think I'm glad to hear that you feel the same way. I've had probably 3 interviews where people have one of the lead questions has been, so why another book about grace? Like, and I accept that. I want to say, like, why another sermon? That's like that's really why breathe another breath? But it's not a silly question, but it is a question that says, because this message is not new or original to me, and if it was, then run for the hills. But it is the same message that needs to be sung in 1,000 different keys, and so the way that I sing it at the point in time and place that I sing it is going to be a little different than how my dad wrote when he wrote a book about grace, or Philip Yancey or Frederick Buechner, these people that I'm trying to emulate a little bit, though I could never live up to. But this is something we come back to in our Christian lives. And I find that, to be honest with you guys, I find that the people I know who have been Christians a long time, the further they get away from the grace of God, usually the less likely they are to remain Christians. That's a terrible, that might sound judgmental, but I've noticed it to be true. It's like, well, that got me in. That, of course, that was what I was interested in when I was in young life and 15. You know, I didn't know who I was, but now I study all these other things, and then grace seems almost passé until you know, you screw up in life, and if you don't have something to hold on to, or if you simply are confronted with death in a very, you know, you know, uh, intense way, then you're going to drift away. In fact, like I find that grace is not only the initiating appeal of Christianity, I think it's the sustaining one.
That's right.
The Holy Spirit brings, you know, to life in all sorts of ways. But, and that's the core conviction of the work we've been doing with Mockingbird for 18 years. And it's certainly the reason I continue to show up at church. Was I love the community. I love the liturgy. I love, you know, the service we do in our town. But what I before any of that amounts to a hill of beans, I need to basically hear the forgiveness of sins and the fact that it's safe to get in the water, and that there's still space for you even on your when you need a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh chance. There's hope at the beating heart of this thing, which is perpetual. The forgiveness of sins is perpetual, and it's that's the grace of God.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm so grateful to have discovered that and continue to discover it. You know, I grew up, as some of our listeners know, in like a conservative Anabaptist church. Sinless perfectionism was taught. There was a lot of confusion. I've been through a lot of different versions of Christianity, especially early on, and I was trying to figure out, am I really saved, and how do I stay saved? And but the Lord's been faithful to shepherd me, and part of that shepherding was not allowing me to have hope in myself, constantly like confronting the selfish ambition, the self-sufficiency. And, you know, at the time it felt like death, because that's what I thought I needed. I thought I needed to be enough. I thought I needed to be stronger. I thought I had to do the thing or be damned. And so, you know, experiencing that big relief of, I'm safe in Jesus. He's enough. I can anchor my life in the grace of God. I have this firm foundation, love that will not let me go. And I don't actually have to be tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine. And I'm a Christian. I'm still a Christian because
I'm breathing a sigh of relief hearing you say this. Yes, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah. I love it.
So I'm still a Christian today because I just can't escape this central reality that Jesus is enough for me as a sinner. And there's many times that I get into dark places where the legal frame comes back, and I'm just confronted with my indwelling corruption and remaining sin. And like, I'm so bad, and I'm so weak, and I'm so broken, and I'm so needy. Is there any hope for me? And then I start reading the big relief, and I get a big smile. I'm like, oh gosh, can't have more hope than this. Jesus is alive, and he's for me. It's by grace that I'm saved, not because of my works. So just being able to like return to the rest that Christ has for me. And that, like you kept talking about the perpetual nature of it. I mean, Jesus's invitation is this effectual, perpetual reality. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And it's like, I needed that 20 years ago. I need it now. I'll need it when I wake up in the morning. I'll need it every moment of my day. And you've just helpfully reminded me that it's true. Philip Carey said, you know, the first reason you should believe the gospel isn't because of the big relief. It's because it's true. Let God be true and every man a liar. And the fact that it is true is the deepest liberation of all, because truth doesn't depend on me. It's not something I have to, you know, make myself believe. It's like, no, this is the objective facts. Has anything been done in history to save me? Will you not tell me the facts? Here are the facts. And it just turns out that the facts are really good news. That brings big relief.
Well, thanks for saying that. Because it is important to note that just because something brings relief doesn't mean it's true. And that is it brings, but that doesn't mean that the truth is somehow is not a relief. Like, this is the central
Right.
claim of Christianity, is this a glorious objective historical truth that is of enormous relief to real people, aka sinners like you and me. I try to spell that out in the very end of it, because that's the danger you run into when you foreground the affective too much. Is people think, well, is this just make us feel good, or is something true because it makes you feel good? No, it makes you feel good because it's true, or it makes you feel, especially if the core message that we're saying is true, is this message of grace, that God is real, and God is not against you, but He's revealed in Christ, and you are that salvation is offered freely to you on account of His death and resurrection.
Not to be too like overly meta or overly theological even maybe, but what I find so compelling is, again, seeing your 3 books, Seculosity, Low Anthropology, and The Big Relief, as a trilogy, and seeing them also I've been thinking about this a lot, Dave, is just seeing them at work within Paul's epistles, which is just to say that if there's this pull that we all have that's innate with us to find some sort of meaning, and we find it in all these other ways. You can think of Paul, where he's talking about in Philippians that he's the Hebrew of Hebrews and he was the most righteous of all the Pharisees. This resume that is impeccable that he has ultimately can't give him any relief, and he comes to this low anthropological reason for it, because like he says in Romans 7, the things that he keeps on doing, or the things that he doesn't want to do, he keeps on doing, and vice versa. Which kind of brings me to what he says in 1 Timothy, where he talks about how God used him as an example of the mercy that he has on sinners, which is to say that the big relief is ultimately what comes at the end of Romans 7, which is, who's going to save me from this body of death? Praise be to God through the Lord Jesus Christ, which goes to that, what you're saying and what Brad is saying, is that it is relieving precisely because it is true. And you can see it within Paul's own writings, himself as a man, as a sinner, as he says, the chief of sinners. And it's precisely because of the relief that is at the heart of the gospel that he was made a minister of, that I think you find such conviction, such catharsis and pathos. You can use all those words, but you find it really within the writings of Scripture, the writings of Paul, which is just to say that this is why it's evergreen. This is why we're still talking about it now, 2,000 years later, because it has provided relief for countless sinners, and it will, as long as the Lord tarries.
Amen to that.
Yeah, what a great episode, guys. Spectacular conversation, and like I said, it's evergreen because it's true, and it's the truth that sets us free, and that freedom is like visceral, and it results in the big relief. So well said. Dave, thank you for coming on. Appreciate your work. Hopefully our listeners will continue to check out your books, listen to Mockingbird, read things, and perhaps if they're not familiar with their work, they will get familiar with your work. Do you have anything you want to kind of plug as we wrap up?
Oh, if you like the book, if you do read it and it does speak relief to you, please give a review on Amazon or Goodreads or a rating or something like that. That's the almighty algorithm. That's the only way to harness its attention. So I know it's a drag sometimes, but that's what I'd appreciate. But yeah, Big Relief's available wherever books are sold. It's audiobook. It's all the things. And you can find me at Mockingbird usually. And yeah, I'm just grateful to be on here, guys. Thanks so much, and thanks for the care and precision with which you've handled this material. And it means a lot to me that you've taken you've brought such thoughtfulness to it.
Yeah, well, thank you again, and we're grateful to do it. So, Bradley Gray, thanks for co-hosting with me today. And all of our listeners, we'll catch you next week for another riveting episode of the Reclamation Podcast. God bless.